All right, YouTube, I've been asked by several people to look at the Economist 2017 cover. Of course, in 2015, it was a big thing. It was almost the dawn of internet occultism as it circulated around certain forums and chat rooms and so forth. People were fixated on it because they noticed fairly early on it appeared to be predictive in nature. Now, I don't say predictive as in, well, prophecy, or they're predicting or they're saying what the elites are going to do this year beforehand or something like that. I choose to believe it's an essence of synchronicity. Now, the fact that this cover uses tarot cards to display, sort of the state of 2017, yeah, that's naturally it's going to get people talking about occultism. I don't myself give tarot that much importance. It's a little bit like a Ouija board, only I guess a little bit more authentic within an occult context. And it's a fortune-telling medium, essentially, and that's really all I think about it. But there are 8 cards displayed here. They all have their distinct meanings, and if you read into what's actually drawn there in the semblance of the old style of actual tarot cards, you can get a fairly good reading. Now I've got the picture up here. I will have to scroll back and forth a little bit because I've got it to the side so I can actually see myself speak. Used to be when I looked at myself speaking, it would be like a little unnerving. Now it's easier to speak actually if I can see myself, even though I generally look actually into the webcam. It's rather odd. It's like I'm seeing myself out of the corner of my eye. It's like I don't understand. Anyway, we'll go through these 8 illustrations here, and I'll give you sort of my reading of what's being said here. Now, the first one is also very important. The Tower is generally not a very happy card within the tarot. It represents upheaval and destruction and all sorts of potentially bad things. The only situation in which it would be good, I suppose, good in interpretation, would be if your situation is so shitty that any form of change is at the worst neutral and possibly better than what you're going through. Yeah, I suppose it could be a good thing. But if you look at the illustration here, you'll see some things shown here. And there is a link in the description, by the way, to the actual picture I'm looking at. You see one group of people with a little communist flag on one side, people raising like the cross with Jesus on it on the other. And if you look at the door of the tower, it appears to have like Martin Luther's papers. So he sort of, when Martin Luther was delivering his stuff there, he sort of, knifed it into the church door or whatever it was. And the way that I look at this is just general political, social, religious upheaval. Probably this image would be more religious in nature. We certainly see that around the world. We see it clashing. This could be interpreted as actually a clashing between Islam and Christianity. Islam and communism, for some odd reason lately, seem to get along. Leftist groups in the West, which are bringing this social upheaval, have embraced Islam as a sort of positive ideology. They don't even realize its connections to the other Abrahamic religions that they usually hate and disdain. Even the atheists among them, they're like, oh, Muhammad was, great, fuck Jesus, or something like that. It's rather odd. I never quite understood this. One thing that actually caused me to part more with hard atheism was really what I saw as their acceptance of Islam as opposed to Christianity. I said, well, how is this any better? If anything, it's probably worse. I didn't really understand it. So this represents general upheaval. Now, this is low-hanging fruit if you're going to make a prediction for what 2017 is going to be like. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of upheaval. Probably a lot more than any of these people at The Economist could ever guess. There will be strife all across the world at a monumental rate. I don't expect it to be more peaceful than 2016. If anything, I expect it to be more social alienation. Again, regardless, I've said, if populism and libertarianism and nationalism and nativism in some cases rises, social alienation will begin to decrease. Cultures will look after themselves. There will probably be less war. There will certainly be less domestic strife in many countries. But temporarily, in the short term, which you could measure as a year, 2 years, whatever, it's actually going to be more stressful because people who are not used to that way of life will be undergoing change, and change, well, sometimes good, can get people a little riled up. You've taught somebody, multiculturalism is good, globalism is good for, a decade. and then all of a sudden they're told, no, it's actually not working and we need to do something else. A lot of those people get a little uppity for a while. A lot of these pink-haired people, anyway. We'll go on to the second card here. Let's scroll over. And by the way, there are two cards on here that are lopsided. I wonder if that's supposed to have any significance within this picture. I haven't seen others that have spoken of this mention it, but Judgment and the Star are both lopsided, tilted to opposite sides. Judgment, of course, shows Trump seated on the world with a diadem and so forth, sort of reigning over things. And to me, the interpretation I would give is Trump is the one reigning over the upheaval of the Western world. That is, Trump is the literal symbol of the populism and nationalism and so forth that is both renewing, it's destroying an old order, bringing upheaval as well, establishing a new order, not like New World Order, Illuminati stuff. I mean a new way of life, a new way of thinking, as opposed to the globalism we exist under now. Attempting to bend over backwards for people who are not part of a reigning culture. Not just here, it happens, basically everywhere. Again, you could look to Africa and you can see their cultures are being upended by the Chinese, so it has nothing to do with, white countries are under assault, or something that some ethnic nationalist might say. It's everybody. There's mass immigration everywhere, which is unfortunate. It's destroying a lot of small cultures around the world. Just a lot of European states are geographically smaller, and then a lot of other states in the world don't have as much power as they used to. So I see this simply as a statement of Trump reigning over this era. And again, it's a little bit low-hanging fruit. The President of the United States, if it's a person of any significant mental capabilities, any significant force of will, charisma, you could call it, they tend to be the leader of the world. They're the number one figure of the entire human race. This has only occasionally not been the case. Even weaker presidents typically are seen as the most powerful person. The fact that Obama was weak on foreign policy led to a situation where people like Putin were seen as strong. That's not the normal mode of how things operate. Usually the West is seen as the hegemon. The Eastern powers, they're seen as secondary in nature, or near even, but a little bit behind at best on their token. You'd think of like Reagan versus the Soviets, or even somebody like Bill Clinton, honestly, people who are not outright warmongers. Generally, even inept presidents are seen as at least more important than their compatriots leading other countries. Then you have the world. Now, the world represents cycling, but also interplay. If you look at this image, you see that sort of this cultural arc is actually above the secular foundation below it. The secular foundation that the image here appears to depict. The pyramid could represent maybe man's brick and mortar religious institutions. It appears to show sort of the capital and sort of a legislative building or Senate building or something of that nature. Above it appears to be literature, art, and theater, sort of the archetypes of human creative endeavor. And farce. What I read into this, when I look at it, I read into this as a statement on the internet, or communication in general. That is that farce, make-believe in some cases, memetics, occultism in a general sense, Shakespearean style, like not theater, but almost real-life method acting, has begun to take hold in the world, such that secular institutions that formerly were isolated from the will of the population are now very much in tandem with it. They're actually being strung around like puppets. And we're seeing this happen. People's will, more than ever before, is coming into play within world politics, in every individual nation and the world at large, at a much higher level, to the point at which foreign populations can now influence the elections of other countries as well. Because people who formerly only got their news from some government source, they got their truth from a government or a corporate media or state-run media, as it may be, now they can get it directly from other people whose lives their elections perhaps impact, their own government's policies perhaps impact. We here in the United States, we look around. We see our election I'm not talking about Russian hacking, by the way, here. That's a myth. I'm talking about influence by people from other countries who are able online to weigh in our elections. That's ultimately what I read into here. Now, I would see this as a good thing. Some would see it as a bad thing. If you believe in establishment politics, you probably see it as the end of times or something like that. Now, as for the hermit, this could be interpreted again as another sort of internet thing. The hermit is looking down at the masses, which are in uproar, which appear to be protesting the TTIP thing and all sorts of other slogans, the EU, and so forth. The masses are ripping apart the old established order. And the hermit is separate from them. The hermit is enlightening himself by being separate. You could interpret this as a return to primitivism, a return to nationalism, tradition, and so forth. And this is actually echoed by the next card as well. The hermit is aware of what's going on, but separating himself to think, to theorize, something along those lines. We see that happening as well right now. You don't even have to wait till 2017. A lot of people are talking about old, formerly dead philosophies as though they were mainstream, they were still alive. We see it online all the time. People are talking about bringing back communism, socialism, where it's been absent for centuries, anarchism, fascism, literal fascism, monarchism, oligarchism, corporate sort of systems, libertarianism like classical 1700s style revolutionary libertarianism, and things like that, certainly civic and racial nationalism the world over. All of these ideologies are now being discussed by those who are semi-separate from society. A lot of this is taking place, again, online. And the stereotypical mode is to say, oh, these are like people living in their parents' basement. These are people that eat Cheetos and Mountain Dew all day, 400-pound hacker, ring a bell. And they're the ones, actually, because they have the time. It's sort of like the hippie movement, all the college kids that were, they didn't have, the day job. They were the ones protesting. They were the ones driving public discourse in many cases. Now it's become the internet crowd. We're the new hippies. And I mean that in the literal sense. We're the new hippies. We're just more numerous and we're more capable of spreading information. We don't have to publish some little hemp paper booklet. We can publish it online. It's a lot more efficient. So it's a part of this general upheaval. Then you have death. And if you look at death here, you have an atomic cloud, or what appears to be an atomic cloud, with death sitting there quite merrily, with flies overhead, an allusion to Beelzebub, I suppose. What I see this is, death is not actually as negative a card within the tarot as you might think. Now, the Tower is a lot more destructive than death ever is. Death can actually be quite a good thing. Sort of a death of an old order, the rise of a new order, part of a cycle in general. You have to deal with cycles as opposed to absolutes sometimes within fortune-telling systems. There is thus, the obvious interpretation of this is there's a risk of annihilation. There's a risk that mankind's either order or existence entirely is cut off, is destroyed. Death, however, is, to me here, more of an interpretation, again, like the Hermit, a reiteration of what the Hermit is saying, which is that we're returning to older styles of order. We realize now that the way the world is going isn't working. It's going to lead to us destroying each other. We have to try a new way. So death represents the dying off of that order because we've realized, we have the gnosis, the knowledge of what's going wrong. We're looking back and we're looking at older systems. We're almost, there is a risk here. The risk is you see some past era as utopian without actually understanding the true ramifications. We'd look back at maybe the eugenic era or the communists, certainly. They'd look back at Marx or something like that. Or we'd look back at the 1700s, the revolutionary philosophies, or even further back to the age of monarchs or the feudal lords or something like that. But we realize we have to change something. We can no longer stay on our course. It's not actually operative. Then you have the magician. And this is an allusion, it appears, to China. Of course, 3D printing homes, that's a big thing. This, you remember from, I think, mid this dying year, sometime around May or June, they were starting to experiment with literally 3D printing entire homes. It does work. It's less expensive than traditional construction. Not sure it's as durable, but this is, to me, the magician here is more the illusionist than the actual occultist. It's an allusion to China's actual weakness. That is, the reason that they're doing these things is not out of strength. They're doing it out of weakness. They're the ones worried their economy will stall out, the growth will stop, the ghost cities won't fill up with people. All of these technologies they're working on won't save them. And so what this to me represents is that China, if you look here, this figure, which represents the nation of China, clothed in red, of course, is wearing virtual reality goggles as well. This individual, representative of this nation, is under the illusion of power, not actual power. And I've said this before for some time. China fundamentally is a weak nation, not a strong nation. It's not homogenous. It has a huge amount of resources and a huge amount of manpower, but it squandered its funding in the way that Venezuela did. It's still doing that to this day. A lot of its money is going into building developments and infrastructure that doesn't actually serve a greater efficiency, a greater economic purpose. Central planning has begun to decline in China. They've begun to lose money on their government planned sort of investments. For a while there, they couldn't. They invest $1, they would automatically get a return on it. It didn't matter what they invested in. Everybody wanted to invest there too, in partnership with the government of China. It's no longer working that way. I see this as China being under illusion, as China actually being weak, and that's the statement that's being made here largely. Then you have the Wheel of Fortune. Now, the Wheel of Fortune is interesting here. It's neither positive nor negative. It's situational. It involves the interplay, the rise and fall of opposites, or something along those lines, generally, within mysticism. Here we see Le Pen rising on the wheel, Angela Merkel falling on the wheel, and what appears to be Geert Wilders there on the bottom, or possibly Vladimir Putin. I think it's Wilders, though. Putin doesn't have that much hair, so I'm just going to assume that that's the Dutch flag I'm looking at, not an upside-down Russian flag or something like that. I'm going to make that logical stretch. What we see here, though, is interesting. This is a statement, I think, on the EU. I think what's being shown here in synchronistic terms is that Merkel's power within Europe is declining. And again, it's kind of low-hanging fruit. It's true. She's pissing off a lot of people. Meanwhile, Le Pen, Front National in France, or French nationalism in general, could lead the way on a reformed EU, something that's more voluntary, not quite as strict, something that's not so regulated. And it's true. If Germany continues to falter, they re-elect Merkel, she keeps doing the same stupid thing she's doing. Le Pen gets elected, reforms the French economy, begins to make inroads into influencing other European states. You could see Angela Merkel lose out as being sort of the number one figure within Europe. And the French actually would begin to run Europe. It wouldn't be the Germans anymore. And thus, you could end up with the situation. Also, you see Wilders at the bottom. Now, Le Pen is more interested in the economic and trade and travel side of reform. Wilders is more of a strictly nationalistic individual. And then Angela Merkel represents globalism. These are the three outcomes for the European Union. It is destroyed under somebody like Wilders, it's reformed under somebody like Le Pen, and it is maintained, but at a great, great cost, and goes into decline under somebody like Angela Merkel. Now, these are just stand-ins, archetypes for people of their similar stock. You see also here the same lightning, the same disaster that's causing the upheaval is hitting Merkel. That would be a statement. The upheaval is partially the result of disenfranchised leftists that are seeing their consensus of reality displaced by populism and nationalism. It's also caused by the coming nationalistic and populistic and libertarian forces of the world that really hate people like Angela Merkel. And one thing above all else unites all of these so-called fringe ideologies: hatred for people like Angela Merkel, hatred for the globalists, for what they see as traitors. So that's what I see here. I see it as a prediction of the rise of France, a prediction of the fall of Germany. And France, the French sort of Front National style of speaking, as perhaps the successful intermediary that both stomps out globalism and also reforms on the basic message of the more vapid populists of Europe who simply appear to want to go back to the true nation states. Or at least that's the way it would be cast by the French. And the final card here, which is also tilted like Judgment, is the Star. And the Star represents hope. It's actually one of the best cards to get within the tarot. if you look at the surface below these stars shimmering in the sky, you see a cratered surface. It looks a little bit like the moon or Mars, but it could also be interpreted as an Earth laid waste actually by nuclear war or some sort of chaos and annihilation, something along those lines. So what you have here is that you have a simple statement. No matter how bad things get, no matter how bad 2017 is looking, no matter what kind of weird chaos is there, things can get better. There is still hope for mankind, and it's a simple message. It's simple enough to understand. So again, this is my interpretation, at least, of what I see here. Now, I make no claim that this is actually predictive of anything in a general sense. I make no claim that I'm some sort of expert tarot card user because, again, I don't give it great importance. But the interpretation, the traditional interpretation, is fairly straightforward. It's fairly easy to understand. And the illustrations here certainly help. Generally, what you're seeing here is a lot of change and upheaval. Much of it could be construed as good, depending on your political or religious ideology, certainly. You see the rise, essentially, of the establishment of a different type of power in the world as opposed to the globalized one that we're suffering under now. Because, again, people, if you look at all of this, the message is basically the same. They realize that something is wrong. They want to return to something, they're just not quite sure about what that is. The upheaval could also be interpreted, by the way, as simply all of these political and social ideologies fighting one another for dominance in country after country after country. And so that would be the reading of The Economist's sort of 2017 tarot card cover here. That's about all. Peace out.